Hello, I'm Dr. Vincent Manirakiza from the University of Rwanda. We are reaching Unit 4 of our course. You are most welcome. In Unit 3, we have seen the two key concepts of climate justice and equity. We have also seen how to develop the skills for addressing climate justice and equity. In this unit, you will learn how to identify the impact of climate change on vulnerable population and how you can set strategies for equitable adaptation and mitigation. 4 topics will be explored: description of vulnerable population, impact of climate change on vulnerable population, equitable adaptation strategies for vulnerable population, and equitable mitigation strategies for vulnerable population. Let us start with the first one. Who are vulnerable population to climate change? First of all, we need to know that vulnerable population are all individuals who are at high risk of experiencing adverse health, social, or economic outcomes compared to the general population. Regarding climate change, the vulnerable populations include people who experience disproportionate, multiple, and complex risks to their health and well-being in response to climate change. For example, people living in poor urban or isolated rural areas, floodplains, coastline, and other risk zones are more vulnerable not only to extreme weather and persistent climate change, but also to social and economic stressors. Now, to what climate changes impact those vulnerable populations are exposed. Climate change causes direct and indirect effects. Direct effects include death and destruction due to extreme events such as floods, wildfires, and hurricanes and typhoons. Indirect effect concerns the individual trauma. Around the world, climate change affects rural communities that heavily depend on their agriculture and natural resources for their livelihood. The most affected groups are older adults unable to respond proactively to the climate change impacts. Rural communities are also affected by intensified agricultural drought that threatens food security, causing the increased risk of malnutrition and water shortages during and after disasters. In the aftermath of disasters, women, children, and elderly find it difficult to bounce back because of income inequality and financial dependence. Climate change impacts also affect people living with disabilities, causing poverty and unemployment to increase, particularly persons with albinism, whose well-being and health are affected by changes in temperature as a result of climate changes and variation. Equitable adaptation strategies for vulnerable populations are essential to ensure that the impact of climate change, disasters, and other environmental challenges are addressed in a fair and just manner. There are various adaptation strategies to be mobilized. Let us explore some of them. 1. Conducting community-led approaches that consist of developing targeted outreach and communication efforts to ensure that vulnerable populations are aware of adaptation plans, resources, and support available to them. It is also important to foster collaboration among governments, non-governmental organizations, academia, and local communities to implement equitable adaptation strategies effectively. Building climate-resilient infrastructure that considers the unique needs of vulnerable populations, such as shelters that resist extreme weather events and flood-resistant housing. There is also need to ensure that adaptation strategies address the basic needs of vulnerable population, such as access to clean water, food security, and safe shelter, which are fundamental to their resilience. Number 4 is establishing social safety nets and financial support mechanisms to assist vulnerable population during and after climate-related events or disaster is also essential. Long-term planning by designing adaptation plans that consider the long-term needs and interests of vulnerable population with a focus on building resilience for future challenges. Now, after the adaptation strategies, what equitable mitigation strategies for vulnerable population? While implementing various mitigation strategies of climate change, such as promoting the use of renewable energy, waste reduction and recycling programs, sustainable land use practices, and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, specific consideration of vulnerable population should be put in place to ensure that these efforts do not exacerbate the vulnerabilities and inequalities faced by these groups. For example, rural community must be financially supported in replanting forests and restoring damaged ecosystems. They can also be supported in diversifying crops so that they are able to adapt to changing climates. If you take the case of clean energy, vulnerable population can be facilitated with renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, and biomass. This involves installing solar panels on community buildings or providing subsidies for renewable energy installations. Access to clean cooking solutions such as improved cook stoves or biogas system can also help to address indoor air pollution and health risks. Lastly, vulnerable community can be trained on clean energy technologies and sustainable practices to increase awareness and build capacity. We arrive at the end of Unit 4 of our course. I hope you enjoyed it. I highly recommend you to read the materials, take the quiz, and keep enjoying the journey. Thank you very much for your kind attention.